Welcome everyone to our first ever San Pasqual Union State of the District Address. We have never done an event like this. We have board meetings where things trickle out over the course of the year, but we've never had an opportunity for a comprehensive look at what our school's all about, where we've been, where we're going, and why we're going there. So I thank you guys for joining us tonight. In the interest of full disclosure, this is what we're talking about, so if this does not interest you, you're probably in the wrong place. But we're going to talk a little bit about our district history, where we've been, our mission, why we're here. We're going to talk about school safety and some of the initiatives that we've done to make sure that we keep our kids and our staff safe. We're going to talk about our instructional initiatives that fall under the umbrella of a multi-tiered system of support, which includes components of community and parent engagement, our academic program, how we support kids in need, and the educational initiatives that you are probably seeing or will soon see. We're going to address a little bit about our finances and talk to you about why we make certain decisions and where our money comes from and where it goes. And our board, on Tuesday night, just updated our board goals, and I want to share them with you to give you a roadmap of where we're going and save some time at the end for some questions and answers. So these pictures here represent our district, where it was and where it is. Our district just celebrated our 100-year anniversary, and the building on the left was the original one-room schoolhouse, and the building on the right is the room you're in right now. And it's sort of that yesteryear and today, and literally today, because that's when I took this picture. But you can see that when the school was built, one of the things that we wanted to do was to honor that past and honor that history. And the room that you're in right now is a replica of the original one-room schoolhouse. And when you walk around campus, you see the great meeting hall, which is our barn. You see our library that was built after the farmer's house with a reading silo and a fireplace, and touches around campus of Barnyard Red. I also included as our bridge from the past the picture of myself and Mrs. Trussell, for whom the building we're in is named. Shortly after I was hired on to be the superintendent, she demanded that I meet with her. And so we met together in the office, and the entire meeting looked like that. The finger waving. It was not a captured moment in time. The entire meeting was that way. And Mrs. Trussell essentially said to me, she wants to make sure that as we move forward, we focus on core academics, that we focus on making sure we build proficiency in kids that can read and write and do mathematics. And she was a little dismayed at all this fancy extra stuff that our school has succumbed to. And we'll talk about some of that fancy extra stuff and why we do it and some of the benefits to kids. But I have kept my promise to Mrs. Trussell in that we still focus on our core academics. The other thing that she said to me that was a little disheartening was she gave me some advice, and she said, Mark, it's okay to grow old. She said, yeah, it's okay to be old, just don't get too old. And then what I realized is that Mrs. Trussell, who was 99 years old, just called me old, which was a little disconcerting. But I looked in the mirror and she was right. Our campus today is a beautiful monument to our past, but a great place for our kids to learn. We've got 27 acres on our campus. Much of that is open spaces for kids to learn, for kids to play, aesthetically beautiful. There's 29 classrooms. We have art rooms, science labs, 18,000 book library, the fireplace and a reading silo, and our barn where we all meet. Prior to becoming a teacher, I was a court officer for the federal courts. And what I noticed was the courtrooms were beautiful. The courtrooms had mahogany benches, they had marble staircases. It was a beautiful place to go. The jails, where I spent the rest of my time, were very sterile and static and kind of sad. When I became a school teacher, most of the schools that I went to reminded me of the jails. They were uninspired, they were rather square, and rather rigid. And they weren't places that brought out creativity in kids. They weren't places that brought out inspiration. And one of the things that I really liked about coming to San Pasqual Union is not only was there thoughtfulness in the environment, in connecting it to our past, but there was care for it as well. And we'll talk to you a little bit about the care that we take for our school and the initiatives that the board has taken to make sure that the school remains in good repair. And I'm convinced that when kids come to a place that has an inspired history to it and that's well maintained, it makes it easier for us to build character with them. So we've been really fortunate with that. But inside this campus, we've got 78 amazing team members, including 31 teachers. Our staff is, as you can tell by this picture, a loving staff. This picture was taken when one of our staff members had tragedy in her life. And they got together and said, we need to make sure that this person knows that we're thinking about her. And so they got together to think of others. And they do love one another. And it's very much like a family here. Some of the dysfunction that rolls with a family, the emotions that roll with a family, but people look out for each other. Our staff members also love the kids that are here. And because we have the benefit of 10 years with some of our kids, kids come here, some of them as early as preschool, go through 8th grade. We really get to know them and embrace them and treat them much more than a normal school where a kid rolls in one day, rolls out the next. Speaking of our kids, this data was from last year. We have a little less than 600 kids here at school. Last year, when the census day was taken, we had 587 kids. And most people, because our campus looks beautiful and we feed from fairly well-to-do neighborhood, thinks that all our kids that way. And about a fifth of our students are students of poverty. A fifth of our students receive free and reduced lunch. 12% of our students are English learners. And that number is a little bit deceiving because a kid, once they maintain a certain level of proficiency, are no longer called an English learner. So I would argue that that number is probably 20% of our kids have been English learners. So we have kids that do come to come to school with struggles and unique challenges that our school is ready to meet. And we'll talk to you about how we do that. We have almost 2% of our school is foster youth, which is very high for schools here in San Diego. And we've got some special programs to address that as well. I wanted to start with our mission. And this is the why we're here. And our mission says that San Pasqual Union School ensures that all children receive an education that builds character, confidence, knowledge, and skills to prepare them to be competent lifelong learners who achieve individual excellence. There's some debate on the whole individual excellence because we've shifted a little bit over to we want the kids to be the best they can be, but we also want them to be global citizens and bringing the best out of others. But the thing that was purposeful in here is placing character and confidence above knowledge and skills. When you look at a school, you often talk about your primary goal is to educate students. And I would say, yes, that is a primary goal. But our primary goal is to create students of character, students that are confident to move in the world, that also possess those skills. We'll talk to you a little bit how we do that. One of the challenges we run into is before we ever get there, we need to have a safe environment for kids. And we place safety, school safety as our most important, of paramount importance, above all others. Kids need to be able to come to school and feel that they're safe. And kids need to be able to operate in an environment that parents know they can drop their kids off in a safe environment. We're taking care of them. And that takes a lot of different forms. You know, this one is when we have our school resource officer come out. I ask him to park right in front of the school, be as obvious as you can, because we want people to know that we're protected. Sometimes that makes people feel nervous. If there's a police car at your school, what's wrong? And our feeling is, no, police are our friend, and police are going to take care of us, and oftentimes they're just checking on us. But there's some things that we do overtly because we live in a society today that there are some people who wish to do others harm. And so we asked the question in our Healthy Kids Survey. So each year we do a California Healthy Kids Survey, and we ask the question of parents and students and staff members, do we have a safe place here? And the resounding answer was yes. Out of all of the folks that were surveyed, when we asked, is SPU a safe place to learn? 100% of staff, 98% of parents, and the majority of students, 87% in the 5th grade, 81% in the 7th grade, so that SPU is a safe place to learn. And what I was pleased about is that From the 2018 survey to 2019, those numbers in middle school are up. Kids feel unsafe for a lot of different reasons, and we have some programs in place to allay some of those fears so that they can get down to building those skills. One of the things that we've done over the last couple years is we've joined into an Escondido School Leaders Safety Consortium. And in this picture, you'll see the superintendents of the Escondido High School District are recently retired. The superintendent from Escondido Union. You'll see the head of Classical Academy. You'll see the head of some of the Christian schools, Escondido Christians leader. You'll see me looking very stern in the background. But good things have come out of this. And really what we did is we got together to say, hey, we're leaders of Escondido children, and we need to stick together and come up with some plans that will work for us. Some of the results of this is we've improved our school safety plans. We've tightened some things up, especially in the area of wildfires, which quite honestly is our biggest risk. We have plans in place for other things, but wildfires tend to be something that we know is going to come, and we've got to be ready for it. So we've improved our plans there. Another topic that came up was if we did need support, and this came up through this committee and through our local safety committee, was that if we get aerial support, we need to be able to direct people where that help is needed. So we put some numbers on our roofs so that aerial support from law enforcement can get to where they need to be and understand where the threats are. We've upgraded our visitor management system. We now have a visitor management system that scans Megan's Law to check to see if we have anybody trying to enter our campus that shouldn't be around children. And it also puts an ID on them with their picture on it, so we can identify that those people are allowed to be here. We will be entering into an agreement in the Say Something program through the Sandy Hook Promise Foundation. We're training on that next week. All of the schools in Escondido will participate in that as well. And that's an anonymous reporting system that, unlike our current system, goes to a dispatch number. And if it's a life-threatening situation, a student's looking to do harm to self or others, or the student knows of someone looking to do harm to self or others, that call is immediately dispatched to law enforcement so that students and others can stay safe. If it's a school issue, they send it over to us and we take care of it like we normally do. But there's trained people that are taking those calls and diverting them to the right places. And what's also exciting about this program is this program includes training for our staff and students. And what that training is looking to do is to help students and staff identify those that are at risk for doing harm to themselves or others. And so that we have a more informed student population, a better trained staff. The other thing that came out of this group is a common language used across the region. One of the challenges that we had was that different things, different events in school, different emergency actions were called different things and got very confusing. So a lockdown, most people think, oh, a lockdown is just a lockdown. You lock your doors, you turn off your lights, and you be quiet for a while and hide from harm. There were different forms of lockdown. People had things called lockdown light, and they had things called soft lockdowns and all sorts of stuff. And it got to the point that schools had names for things that when law enforcement responded, they couldn't give the school direction on what to do, and they didn't understand what the school was doing. And so we came up with some uniform emergency actions. So a lockdown, it means that we're locked in our classroom, preventing intruders from entering in. Secure campus is if something's in the neighborhood that we're concerned about. So we make sure that our entryways are more secured, that classes are more secured, but school goes on. We have some shelter in place if we've got some incidents of some contaminants in the air. Take cover if we've got weather issues. The duck cover and hold on is the old earthquake drills. An evacuation order if we got to go somewhere else. We have some other emergency actions that we also use. We have some structured reunification if we ever had to get kids back to their parents. And one thing that we have used is we've had an early release. One of the things you can expect if we had a fire emergency in the region but not threatening our school, we call an early release and we get parents to come pick up their kids. So that if we ever did need to take some action here at the school, we're doing so with less kids in harm's way. So these things have really been helpful as far as making sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody understands one another. The big thing that always comes up when we talk about these emergency actions is, what do you do when there's an active threat or an active shooter. And we have adopted a run, hide, fight protocol here at school. And people get really nervous about this protocol when it comes to schools, especially elementary schools, because you're expecting my kindergartner to fight an intruder. And that's not at all what we're looking to do. Really what we're looking to do is to give teachers the ability to have some situational awareness to keep kids safe. And so when we look at if there was a threat that came in this front door, most of us would run out the back. You'd get yourself away. Instinctually, as human beings, we get ourselves away from harm. And our prior protocols, the traditional lockdowns, which is you lock your door and you huddle up and you be quiet, has not proved the most effective strategy in some school tragedies. And so we have given our teachers the ability to run if possible. And the direction they get is that they can leave a situation if they know the location of the threat and they know a safe pathway to get away from it. And so the teachers have the ability to do that, and we've practiced that with our teachers. If they don't know the location of the threat, or they don't know how to get away, we encourage them to hide, traditional kind of lockdown stuff. But hide in a way that they're barricading their doors, that they're prepared to shift to that run if they do know the location of the threat and they can find a way out. And then the fight is often misconstrued as a physical fight with an intruder. When we look at the fight, especially in an elementary school setting, we're really looking to distract or disorient, maybe throw things at people just to get yourself back into that run, hide again. So we don't train our students to fight intruders, but for our middle school students, we do talk about the possibility of if something happened in your classroom, what could you do? And then in a developmentally appropriate way, we look at what that would look like in younger and younger grades. In kindergarten, what that looks like is the teacher talks to the kids about, if they're superheroes and there's a villain outside, what would you do? And they can understand that in a way that's not psychologically harmful. Because that's the other challenge when we're addressing these things is we don't want to do more harm than good in our preparation. The odds of us encountering, either at school or in a community, an active shooter event, it's less likely than being struck by lightning 2 times. So it's very unlikely that this is going to happen to us. But it is almost certain that it's going to happen somewhere. And so we want to be ready. We have the unique benefit here at San Pasqual Union School to be off the beaten path. A lot of people don't know we're here. That helps us a lot. If there was an emergency, we're off the beaten path. It takes a little bit longer for people to come. So we want teachers to have the ability to take some action if they need be. When we kind of do a diagnosis of some of these tragedies at schools, there's limited things that can be done in the midst of those tragedies. You can employ your run, hide, fight strategies and keep people safe. But what we found is that we need to take some steps before those things happen. And we need to look at proactive and preventative approaches to safeguard students. And this kind of falls under an umbrella that we call, MTSS, but I'll get to that in a moment. What it includes is it includes regular drills. We'll do our first emergency drill tomorrow to get kids in positions where they can evacuate, where they know how to duck and cover, where they know what a lockdown looks like. We don't practice active shooter with our students because of the potential psychological harm. But we do look, when we kind of step back a little bit, say, how would you prevent this from getting to that point? And we do so by building children of character. We build children that have empathy and sympathy for one another, that truly care for one another. We had a student today, we do SOAR tickets with our students. They exemplify good character. And a student came in the office today and rang the bell for her SOAR ticket, and I said, what'd you do? And she said, I asked a friend who was eating by themselves to eat with us. And this is a first grader, second grader. And you want to build that capacity in them to be truly concerned for others. And since this school was built, I believe beforehand, we've emphasized the 6 pillars of character. We talk about kids that are being trustworthy and honest. We talk about kids that are respectful and responsible. We talk about kids that care about one another, that are good citizens, that play fair. All of those things apply to all of our kids. They apply to our staff, and it's what we want out of them. It's that first piece of that mission about developing their character. But we've also added in some things about how do we intervene to promote that character? What do we do if they don't make the right decisions? Because kids are learning. They're learning who they're going to be. And so we've implemented a program of positive behavior interventions and supports. And that's really showing kids the right thing to do, as opposed to being overly critical of the wrong thing. So if a kid's running through campus in an unsafe way, we encourage them to walk instead of screaming at them not to run. We look at ways that they can interact in response to be praised for the good things as opposed to being overly criticized for the others. And that's what our Expectations Expo is about. We have that the second day of school, and we bring kids around campus and we explicitly explain to them how they act in the library, in the lunch line, at the tables, on the playground, how they're safe, how they exemplify those character traits. Middle schoolers, we up it a little bit and we talk about how you can be safe on the internet, how you can be safe with your friends. We've also implemented a program of restorative practices. Historically, schools have been very punitive. When kids have done bad things, they've been kicked out of the school. And kids get kicked out of the school so many times that they end up out of school or they're not really learning, and that has proven to be a pathway to prison, quite honestly. Restorative practices really dials it back and looks at why are you doing what you're doing and who you're harming by your actions. And it includes a process of rebuilding that student, having them understand what harm they're causing, even if it's pulling somebody's pigtails. Who did you harm and why are they feeling the way that they're feeling? And allowing them the opportunity to make amends for that and get back in. Because that's really what we want. We want inclusion. We've also implemented trauma-informed care. We're finding more and more students, especially our foster youth, are coming to school the victims of traumatic experiences, whether that's something done to them or there's been some neglect. Trauma has been found to physically alter children's brains. And it physically alters their brains in a way that when they receive a trigger or a stimulus, their brain literally kind of flips and shuts and they don't make logical decisions. So it's helpful for our staff to understand not only what are those things that may cause that, but how do we react when it does? How do we provide safety in a safe place so that students can be successful? And then, as I mentioned before, we are looking at implementing and have started to implement what's called MTSS, Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. And that starts to tie in all of this social-emotional stuff we've been talking about with the academic programs. And it ties in our school and our community and the parent involvement. It ties in what curriculum we use. It ties in the PBS I mentioned. It talks about how we train our staff. And then it talks a little bit about the RTI model, how we address the core curriculum, and then what do we do for students that aren't getting it? And then what do we do for students that might have a disability that need something different? So we'll talk about that. But first of all, we'll talk about community partnerships. One of the things that makes our school really special is the partnerships that we have. We've reached out to the community and have a relationship now with Cal State San Marcos, that students completing service learning projects come to our school to help kids learn how to read. So you have college students that do that. We have probably about 6 or 7 MOUs with the County Office of Education to help us with our technology, to help us with data, to help us with our staff training. We have a MOU with Elizabeth Hospice for grief counseling. Before the ink was even dry on the paper, we needed it. And so our kids experience these tragedies here at school, and we need to make sure that we're supporting them the best we can. And then probably our proudest partnership is with the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. We've had a long-standing relationship. That picture on the top right was taken at our old campus. We used to have a 4th grade annex. And that cheetah is sitting on the playground of the old campus. And you could tell by the faces of some of the kids that they're a little nervous by it, as they should be, because we have smart kids here at San Pasqual. But we've had a long-standing relationship with the Safari Park. And sadly, we don't have our annex there. There were some re-priorities about 10 years ago that pulled things back. But to the Safari Park's credit, back then it was a wild animal park, they maintained their commitment to us and vice versa. And we continue to have a program now. We created a program a year or so ago called the We Care program. And it stands for Wildlife Education Conservation Action Reaching Everyone. And this year it finally is reaching everyone here at San Pasqual. The program started out for our TK through 4th grade students, and now it's been expanded all the way through our 8th grade. And what this program is about, Safari Park comes out to our campus, teaches our students on specific areas with a focus on conservancy, and connects them to real-world researchers. and takes them over to the park and shows them what they've been learning, give them hands-on learning experiences. And the safari park does this through a grant in which they're trying to build an educational program that they can distribute internationally. And we're the beneficiaries of that. We get direct access to real-world learning in science and biology, and we can do it right down the street. So it's an amazing program. The picture on the bottom left was our back-to-school training. We got to sit behind the tiger cage, and unlike the kids, we had glass between it, so we were a lot more comfortable sitting there. But they treat us very well, and they treat our kids even better. It's a pretty amazing thing. The other piece of this community parent partnerships is, do the parents feel welcome here at school? And in that similar survey, we asked parents, staff, are parents welcome here? And again, overwhelmingly, people say, yeah, we feel like we're welcome here. When you take a look at some of the parent partnerships we have, our PTO is an amazing group. They put on 5 events in like 3 weeks. Our San Pasqual School Foundation raised nearly $100,000 last year to support key programs in science and physical education and the arts. Our Red Barn Arts program promotes the arts in all grades with art docents. We have a very active Sage Garden that talks about farm to table. Our DLAC group, I met with them just last week. Our DLAC group is for our Spanish-speaking parents to integrate them more in the school. That's very active under Julie Romero. Our School Site Council, capably led by Mr. Legge, is helping guide the decisions that our school makes by reviewing the plans that we're proposing and making recommendations directly to the school board. We have reading programs that are helping kids to read, and many parents volunteer in the classroom. One of the more stunning things that popped out of our Healthy Kids survey was the fact that 99% of our parents, at least the ones who responded to the survey, attended some sort of event at school. And 82% volunteered over the course of the year to do something. So not only do we have these vibrant groups, but parents show up to participate. And I think that's why when you start looking at why people are attracted to this school, why students get these experiences that they don't get anywhere else, a big part of that is that we have parents that are willing to show up. When we kind of look at what they do throughout the course of the year, this is going to be one of the few nights I'm not going to ask anybody for money. But through the course of the year, our parents' groups work really hard to self-sustain these programs. One of the challenges for some extra programs at school when we do these enriching events for kids is how do you pay for it? And how do you pay for it in times of downturn? And if you look at our San Pasqual School Foundation, like I said, they raised $100,000 to support these wonderful programs. Our PTO raises money that goes directly back into the classroom, creates events and activities at school. Both our Red Barn Arts and our Sage School Garden have been self-sufficient. They raise enough money for their own supplies and their activities and the things that they need to create art and to teach kids about where their food comes from. Pretty amazing stuff. We have, with all this stuff going on, found the need that we needed to upgrade our communications. So using a school grant that we received last year, we upgraded our website. We've integrated that website with a mass communication system. We're in the process of releasing a school app so that people know what's going on. Because 82% is just not enough. We want more people to come show up and be with us. The Parent View app through the Synergy program allows parents to track their kids' attendance and receive notifications if their grades drop. And then we recently switched over to a Peach Jar flyer system in lieu of our SOAR newsletter. And right now, I just took a screenshot of it earlier, we've got 12 different things in there that parents are being communicated with. And one of the things I wanted to point out, and you'll be in the know for showing up tonight, is just a filter at the top of that. You can kind of see that little school filter at the top. The one thing that Peach Jar does really well is it provides a free service to schools to get things out to the community, and it allows us the ability to do that in a way that you can sort it by the items that you want to receive and that you don't. And if you don't want to know about baseball or softball or scouts or other things that show up in there, you separate it up by the school, and the school will tell you just stuff that's going on at the school. And this page gives you a little indication that PTO is pretty active. They're selling all sorts of stuff, spiritware, recruiting more people. It's a great place to go to find out what's going on. And because this system's a flyer system with a date stamp on it, things that are no longer relevant go away. So it's easy for you to tell what's happening now. because we've got so much great stuff going on, we get a lot of people that want to come to our school from other districts. And I wanted to show you this trend because there's a trend that's related to us and a trend that's bigger in public education. If you look at the red line on the trend, that shows our resident students. And we are suffering kind of the same fate that our neighbors are, in the sense that communities are aging. There's people that kids have moved through the school and they no longer have kids that they're sending to school. And we also have the challenge of addressing the influence of charter schools. In the past, you'd have a handful of people that would go to a private school. Now you're seeing far more that'll go to a charter school because it's free and they have more options in their education. And so what we've seen primarily through the aging of the community, we've seen a reduction in our resident students, but we've made up for that with an increase in our inner districts. So if you kind of look at the graph here, you can see that over the years, we've maintained a relatively stable enrollment. If you kind of look at the column over here, you can see that our enrollment has really gone from a low of 5 in the 560s, where we're at right now, and up to a high in the 590s. The low right now is reflective of a couple things. Number one, we tend to get students through the course of the year more than we lose them. So we'll pick up some more, and by the time these numbers push out of year-end numbers, we'll have some more kids. But we are facing two other challenges, and one is that influence of charters, but the other is our primary district that feeds our inner districts is Escondido Union. And because those students leaving were influencing their budget negatively, they put together a inter-district declining enrollment task force. And what that means is they're trying to maintain more of their kids. So our kindergarten enrollment numbers are smaller than we've seen in the past. So it's going to be more important than ever for us to continue to offer a strong academic program and strong programs to get people to come, because it's harder and harder for them to do so. Speaking of our academic programs, we've got some wonderful things going on here at San Pasqual Union. We have qualified and committed teachers. As I mentioned before, the Jane Trussell Directive is the focus on reading and math proficiency for all our students. Our social studies and history is aligned with our language arts and integrated with our visual arts. We're implementing next generation science standards. We've got an exploratory wheel in middle school. And even though we're small, we only have 2 to 3 tracks in our middle school per grade level. We offer an exploratory wheel that gets them excited and interested about things that they're likely to experience in the next phase of their education in high school. If you look at the wheels, they're all designed in a way that they integrate a language, an art, and a technology. The 3 languages were specifically chosen because they're the 3 languages that kids can take when they get to high school. So although they only get a trimester of each, of sign language, of Spanish and French, they get an interest in what they like. They also get an opportunity to expand and do more than that on their own, because we have a lot of these in online programs. In our technical side, we have kids that make sets for stage, that they're going to be filming events and activities here at our school, a built-in PR department. And then we've added into that a creative gardening class, in which kids are going to work in the garden, learn about conservancy tied to the safari park, and then take pictures and do drawings and so forth. In our technology side, we have students that are learning to bake through media. We have kids that are coding and doing robotics, and a forensics class. So some really interesting things that we've got going on for kids that our goal is to get them excited for now and get them excited for the future. We also offer TK through 5 specialty teachers in STEM and in music. So all of our TK through 5 students go through and they receive music through a credential teacher, they receive science through a credential teacher. Some of you may be wondering now, well, didn't you also do PE and tech? And the answer was, yeah, we did. And people say, well, if you're not doing it, are you not valuing those programs? And I would say, no, we very much value those programs. There's a couple reasons why we steered away from that. One was budgetary, and I'll get to the budget in a little bit. And one was instructional programming. And we looked at what are the effects of these programs having. And I wanted to do the instructional programming first. Because the question was, when we were looking at these programs, are students learning at San Pasqual? And these are the results of our CASP scores. You can look at it from 2015 when the test started to 2018. And over that time, you see that kids were achieving lower and lower proficiency levels. And we started taking a look at why is that happening. And one of the things that we looked at was, again, the Jane Trestle directive. If you have kids out of class and away from their teachers for a long time, and they're not getting as much reading instruction, they're not getting as much writing instruction, they're not getting as much math instruction, what effect is that going to have? And we do believe that that is part of the reason why we saw this decline. And so we started looking at, if we're going to give them a little bit more, how can we do that? Well, our teachers are technology proficient, and so our teachers do a good job of integrating technology into class. They didn't need to leave the classroom to get that. That's one of the reasons that we did that, along with finances. Our teachers are all trained in the elementary as multiple subject teachers, which includes proficiency in PE. So we want to make sure that when students start their day, in the prior model, they were leaving the classroom for up to 2 hours a day. That included our kindergartners. Kindergartners are only here till 1:30. They're only here so many hours. About half their day, they were somewhere else. And we wanted our students back in front of their regular classroom teachers to make sure that we gave them the opportunity to receive the education that they deserved. So it's not that we don't value those programs. It's a financial commitment, and we looked at our data at the time. I'm happy to say that this past year, and this data is only tentative, so we have not received the official certification from the state yet, but the tentative data is showing that our students in language arts are learning. They've gone up 9% in language arts in 1 year. Our students are learning in math. They've gone up 5% in 1 year. And these tweaks were really our first step in giving teachers a little bit more time and control over their schedule, a little bit more say in how kids are intervened with, a little bit more technology reliance. We had some inconsistencies with our technology network, and we spent a decent amount of money on infrastructure to make it work. We spent money on more tools, because although we don't feel that technology is the panacea to learning, if those tools are absent, students are going to be hindered. So right now we have purchased technology so that all our students from 2nd through 8th grade have access to one-to-one devices. But the most important thing is how those are used, not necessarily that they're there, and whether they can be reliably used. And right now we have both. So we have seen that kids are learning. We expect them to learn even more with some of the new initiatives that we have. So here's where we're going. We kind of have a formula we put together, that you take your effective educators, you combine them with engaged learners, and you get learning for all. We had a really interesting and unique debate among our board when we were setting our board goals, and I'll show you those goals in just a moment. And that debate was, what is our responsibility to all students? And there was a long talk about equity, and that as a school, we have a society that is not overly equitable. You have some students that have opportunities, some students that come with more skills, some students that get more support. And how does the school system provide equity for students? And how do we provide a learning environment in which each and every child succeeds? And so these are some of the paths that we're on for that. One of the things that we did with grant money is we formed a school improvement committee. We took some of our teachers that were engaged and innovative and put them together on a committee to say, how can we do this job better? Similar to when we listened to them this past year when we saw all these great gains in our learning. The goal is to improve teaching and learning. Simple as that. We want to create more effective educators, and we want to make sure that we measure the growth of our students. The focus on that is building effective educators and engaged learners. And one of the tools we're going to do that with is through data-informed instruction. And that data is going to guide how we roll out our initial instruction and the modifications we make along the way. So we've used our grant money that we received, and we purchased a data visualization tool, and we've signed on a partnership with the County Office of Ed so that we have access to comparative data to see how we're doing. One of the challenges with the accountability system in the state makes it really hard for us to compare how we're doing and emulate good practices across the board. So we're looking forward to using those tools. Some of the techniques we're putting in place is cooperative learning. We had the Kagan Institute come out as our back-to-school training, and teachers learn techniques on how kids can learn better with one another, how we can get a more active voice in the classroom, how we can transition more quickly so that we have more time to instruct. Another focus is teacher clarity. exactly what are we teaching and how do we know that kids are learning it. So that'll be a big focus of our professional learning communities moving forward. We're focusing with staff on formative assessments. We don't want to teach something for 6 weeks only to find out that the kids didn't get it. Formative assessments are along the way. You're checking in with students to make sure that they're getting the concepts. And if they're not, we intervene at the time. The summative tests are really nice to know, but the summative tests are more like an autopsy. You get to the end of the school year, you get one big test, the patient's already dead, you can't do much about it. But these formative tests are kind of like checkups. See how they're doing along the way. Much more important in our ability to work with kids. I referred to RTI earlier, and that's our response to intervention. It's basically a premise in which about 80% of the kids need more of a core instruction. They're ready for whatever's being presented at that grade level. You've got a lesser percent, probably about 15%, that just aren't going to get it. They need a little bit more small group, maybe a double dose of instruction. And then you've got some kids in a smaller percentage, 5% so, maybe 10, that have a learning disability. They need something markedly different. And so we're looking at how do we do that, and how do we do it in a more systematic way so that kids are getting what they need when they need it. And then we're also looking at implementing, and this is part of our board goals, the 6 C's of the 21st century learner. I had the privilege of going and listening to Dr. Fullen speak at the county office not too long ago. And he's written more books than I've ever read. But he's an impressive scholar, and he put together something that resonates with the direction that we're going, and it's the 6 C's of education. It's saying that when we're educating students, similar to our mission, one of those C's is we focus on character education. We focus on whether they're good citizens. We focus on them having the ability to communicate with one another, and we focus on their critical thinking abilities, their collaboration, how they work together. But we don't leave out the creativity. As I mentioned earlier, the arts have always been big here and always will. But creativity extends beyond that. Our greatest thinkers, our most successful people, are people who think differently than other people. And we want to make sure that we're not educating students that think like everybody else. We want them to be unique. And so we are embracing the 6 C's of the 21st century learner. As I mentioned before, the school board met the other night, and they approved 6 goals for the district. And they said, first and foremost, we want to make sure that the district can pay its bills. We want to make sure the district stays out of trouble. And so they put this goal, we discussed this specifically, as our number 1 goal. And I want to give you a little idea of where we are fiscally. So here's the good news. The state puts out funding models, and these are the revenues for San Pasqual Union School over the last 5 years, not including last year or the current, because in traditional state fashion, they're a little bit behind. So this is the most current data that they published to us. And what you'll see is year over year, since 13-14, we've received a little bit more money than we had before. Back in 12-13, school districts were drastically cut in their funding, and we've been recovering ever since. Back in 13-14, they put in a model that's the local control funding formula. And ever since then, they have been giving school districts more and more money. And last year, they finally got us fully funded back to how much they were funding us in 12-13. So we've been climbing to get back to previous levels. And so if you looked at 18-19 numbers, they're the same, but just a little bit more. Oops, sorry about that. But what you'll see is where most of that money is coming from what's called LCFF, which is the local control funding formula, which isn't great news for us, and I'll show you that in just a moment. When you look at per student revenues, you can see that San Pasqual Union in the pink gets far less than other districts. We get far less than other elementary districts, and we get far less than the average of all districts. And there's a couple reasons for that. High schools get funded higher than elementary districts do, and that's one of the factors. But the other factor is our demographics. As I shared with you earlier, we've got about 20% of kids here who are in poverty, and about 2% are foster youth. and we have about 12% English learners. The state funds additional money to schools that have higher proportions of students in those categories. And if you reach a 55% school population, you receive much more money through concentration grants. So we receive the same base as everyone else, a little bit of money in supplemental funding, and nothing in concentration grants. So that's why when you look at this trend, it's the reason why our neighbors down the street receive a lot more money. And the idea behind this makes sense. The idea behind it is, as we talked about before, students who come from certain backgrounds who have deficits in language or poverty in the home, they probably need more. The challenge for a school district like ours in operating is we still have to provide an outstanding service with less money. When you look at our expenditures, you can see over the years that our expenditures have increased as well with this new money that's coming from the state. We were able to hire some new teachers to provide things like the rotations. We were able to bring in some more special education teachers. We were able to bring in some specialty positions like an English language coordinator, and we were able to bring in a reading specialist. So we're able to provide services with this money. But there's kind of two things to look at. Last year, LCFF fully funded. And if you look at what's increasing the most in here, is we have been paying our teachers a little bit more. So we've been trying to keep up with, keep pace so that our teachers, we can continue to attract highly qualified teachers and retain them so they don't leave for a higher paying district. We've been able to continue to pay a little bit less, or to spend a little bit less in our services and operation by streamlining some things. However, the piece that continues to grow, and grew last year, will grow next year, and grow after, is that employee benefits. The state is upside down on their ability to provide retirement benefits to employees. The STRS program for our certificated staff, the PERS program for our classified staff. And so each year, the percentage that the school districts are required to pay continues to rise. And the challenge, and this is what we found last year, is that escalation of the retirement benefits, coupled with a modest raise for our staff, resulted in less money. And that's why we had to make some difficult decisions as far as which programs could we do without in order for us to maintain our fiscal solvency. These are our multi-year projections. And what these do is these talk about what we see in the current year and the next year and the next year out. And when you look at our beginning of year balance for this year, we had a balance of over $1 million. People are like, $1 million, that's great. And it is pretty good. It's better than most of our neighbors, at least proportion to their budget. We took in, or expect to take in this year, $6.1 million. We expect to spend about $6.1 million. Our job here in the district is to make sure that if we're receiving money that's supposed to go for the benefit of the kids, it goes for the benefit of the kids. Our end of year balance is going to be approximately the beginning. You do see in our multi-year projections, though, that we start dipping into some of those reserves. You see in 2021, 21, 22, you see us spending a little bit more than we're taking in. The projections of the state right now are that we're going to receive flat funding, meaning the same funding year after year. But unfortunately, our retirement benefits are going to continue to go up, and our teacher salaries, if they have anything to say about it, are going to go up, and they should. And our teachers get our increases in their salaries in two different ways. One is their step and column, which comes to them each year. So that's kind of fixed into this budget. This budget doesn't account for the raises that are likely to come as well. So we look at next year and we look at us being in a deficit of about $140,000. And so we need to kind of take a look at what can we do between now and then to continue to maintain that solvency. And we look a little bit further out, the deficit gets a little bit bigger. We still have adequate reserves, but it gets a little bit bigger. People ask, why do you need to save that much money? Why do you need to carry $1 million from one year to the next when you're only bringing in $6 million? Why do you keep so much money? Statutorily, we're required to keep 4% as a reserve. Not enough to address a significant emergency. It's about a quarter $1 million. As I mentioned before, we have those escalating retirement obligations. And then we've got a campus that is now approaching 20 years old, and things are starting to break. Our HVACs need to be replaced. The HVAC guy is like one of our staff now. He comes out, he's here all too often, and in the process, classrooms are getting too hot. Kids aren't learning as well. And we've designated $200,000 for HVAC replacement. If we were to replace all the ones that need to replace, it's going to approach $1 million. So we're going to be putting together a 5-year plan to look at how we can slowly tap into that through this money that's been deferred so they don't touch our educational programs. Similarly, our alarm system, our PA system, not working like it used to. We've set aside a little bit of money to make that work. Our declining enrollment, as I showed you before, we have right now, this year, from last year to this year, we have about 20 kids less. I expect us to make up at least half of that. But for us, when you looked at that model before, we get about 8,000 to 10,000 a kid, depending on certain circumstances. And so that's 12 kids. So if we make it up half of that, that $100,000 will be the declining enrollment. Curriculum, we set aside $100,000 for curriculum. We expect to be adopting a new science curriculum that matches those next generation science standards, probably by the end of this year, if not early next. And then our history curriculum also needs to be updated. We've set aside some money for technology upgrades. We have a technology refresh program that makes sure that every few years teachers get a computer that can keep up with the increases to educational software. We have upgraded so that students all have one-to-one devices that will last probably about 4 or 5 years. And so we want to make sure that these gains aren't lost, so we've set aside some money for that. And then we have increases or added expenses in, as I mentioned, salary. Our special ed expenses are going up. We have legal expenses that we've minimized this year, which is wonderful. The facilities we talked about, transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So when we look at it, people are like, well, what's the outlook financially for us? Fortunately, we're good, especially comparatively good. We've had a really smart board over the years that has realized that these expenses are coming. And so we have what's called a positive certification. So when we create our budget and we send it off to the experts in the state and the county, they look at our budget saying, hey, can you pay your bills this year and next year and the year after that? And we have a positive certification. Many of our neighbors right now have a negative certification, which means that they're not able to pay their bills the next year or the year after. Some of them have a qualified certification, which means they can't even pay their bills this year. And so you're seeing, if you watch the news, you're seeing districts take steps that are cutting their busing program, or firing their administrators, or their counselors, or their aides. And they're taking steps to get their budget up right that aren't necessarily in line with the best education for students. If you cut busing routes and kids can't come to school, they're not going to be learning very much. And so our district has done a very good job over the years of saying, let's anticipate this. We do have the concerns, though. We've got all those expenses that we talked about, flat projections. So we may get to a point where we do have to make some difficult decisions. But we'll make them in a way that will remain fiscally conservative, but those decisions will be student-centered, and we'll look at what's working and what's not, similar like we did this year. Coming back to the board goals, and this is what I'll finish up with tonight. We talked about the board's #1 priority of making sure that we're fiscally solvent so that we can make good decisions for our kids. The second goal ties into what we talked about before, about a safe, clean, and well-maintained campus. Part of that is setting aside money for our preventative and deferred maintenance. But part of that is maintaining a culture, as I said before, that we have a clean campus, we have a safe campus that kids can come and learn, and they feel good about being here. The goal #3 is one I talked about earlier, which was our equity issue, academic achievement for all. And they want to make sure that we're focusing on an academic program that promotes critical thinking and progress in all areas, and to do that in a data-informed way. And as I mentioned, we've purchased some tools to do that. The other 3 goals that the board had is they said they want our teachers to be highly effective and student-centered. We want to continue to give them fair raises so that we can have folks that want to be here. We want to continue to promote a positive culture so that people want to be here. even if they might not make as much as their neighbors. We want to develop teachers to use high-impact instructional strategies, so we're looking at research-based instructional practices that work so that we can meet the diverse learners we have. Our school's not as diverse as some, but we still have a diversity in our learning. And we want to measure staff effectiveness. So this was another topic of discussion. We want to see if what we're doing is working, and if it's not working, how do we make changes to do that? Goal number 5 is our 21st century learning environment. This goal used to be one that said we want to get as many devices as we can into the hands of kids. The board looked at that and said, no, the devices in the hands of kids are somewhat a given. What do they do with them when they get there? And so we want to make continuous improvement towards the effective use of this technology. We want to promote and facilitate innovative student and teacher use. And as I mentioned before, we're incorporating those 6 C's. And last but not least, and we referred to this before, we want to make sure that we bring our parents and our community in. We discussed before about how many parents show up. We discussed before about how many parents actually volunteer and the programs that we have with our local community. That is something that we will continue, and that makes San Pasqual a place that's special. Briefly, we have 3 other goals that are LCAP goals, and these are 3-year goals. Quite wordy, so I will not read them to you, but I'll tell you what they say. All 3 of them say we want to improve student achievement, which we believe we've done. And we want to improve student achievement first and foremost by having great teachers in a safe school. We want to improve student achievement by targeting kids that need the support, and we want to improve it by making sure that we have an engaged student and parent community. And we're on the road to that. So when you ask that fundamental question of what's the state of San Pasqual Union, the state of our district is strong. I know you snicker, but it's true. The state of our district is strong. We've got a safe school. We've got quality programs. We've got great teachers. We've got high-achieving students. We're fiscally sound, and we have strong governance to keep us there. So that's about all I have. Does anyone have any questions? I gave you a little bit of information, so.
Can I ask a question about
Please
the
do.
safety plan?
Yes.
So I know that I've heard from several people we're gearing up for quite the wildfire season. Last year we had that fire that's jumped pretty quickly into the neighborhood. So when it jumps that, obviously if you have a heads up, you can do an early dismissal, which do the kids have to be checked out at early dismissal, or the kids that walk home, I assume, can't walk home?
They cannot.
So what do you do when you're told to evacuate?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because this is where our collaboration produced the most benefit. We've been building our safety plan, comprehensive safety plan, for the last 6 years. And that plan includes actions for every conceivable thing that could happen. As I mentioned, fire is the most conceivable thing. And that plan had in its place the idea that if we had something quickly moving towards us, that we would have what's called the directed transportation. And essentially what that is every vehicle, all of our buses, all of our personal vehicles, all of the district vehicles, we get as many kids in those vehicles, and we do an off-site evacuation. We have a couple areas depending on the fire. And so when we rolled this proposal out recently to the firefighters, they said, nah, that's not a really good plan. And we're like, well, why? If the fire is right here, shouldn't we get somewhere where it's not? Similar to our run, hide, fight. Here's the risk. We know how to get out of here. Let's get there. And what they shared with us is 2 things that were super important. Number 1 is that most fires historically, we would have a 3-hour notice. And we've been tagged into the protocol that the safari park receives, because the fires would typically come that direction and come approaching the safari park, and they give them a notice, and typically they have 3 hours. And the firefighter said, if they can evacuate elephants in that time, you can certainly get your kids out of here. And so that's when we have our early release. And so that's when we call parents and we say, there's fire in the area, or there's fire that we expect to be in the area, and you need to, we recommend that you'd come. When we had fires years ago, there were 3, when the fires that burned all the way out to the coast, there were 3 small fires in Escondido that day. And we instituted an early release. We called parents around 1 o'clock, and by 2 o'clock, we had 3/4 of our kids gone. In a very orderly way, parents showed up, They said, I want to take my kid, and then they made whatever decisions they made with them. And although we didn't have to take any action, instead of having close to 600 kids and close to another 100 staff, we had released about 3/4 of our kids and about half our staff. Because some of our staff was in that, their homes were being affected as well. To get to your point about if it really comes on us very quickly, this was the other piece that was really helpful. And what they told us is that by reviewing historical burn patterns, our school is the place that they would come to stage as opposed to the place we should leave. And so they have within their plans our playground as a helicopter staging area and where they kind of put all their different trucks, because historically, the topography and the way that community has been built out, the burn goes around. And when we were threatened years ago, at the time I was living over in Rancho San Pasqual, and it burned right up to the fence at the edge of the community, but no homes were harmed. And part of that was the effort of the firefighters, and part of that was the topography of how things were built. So if and when we had that type of emergency again, first and foremost, we have direct communication with the firefighters, and they give us advice as to how much time we have and so forth. But they would let us know whether we have 3 hours to try to get people out, or if we're looking at having a shelter in place. And it's very disconcerting for people to feel a fire's coming and we're gonna hunker down. But the firefighters are the experts, and based on history and information, we follow their direction. But our number one goal would be to get as many kids away as possible, but we would not send them on their own. One of the challenges that schools have had in fire emergencies has been students that don't have anybody at home, students that can't come to pick them up, and what do you do with them in the meantime? I feel very fortunate that historically this is a safe place to be, and that's one of the big changes that we learned. Anybody else have any questions? All right, well, I do want to thank you all for being here. Just to give a little recognition, we have Jessica, who's serving on our PTO right now. So it's her second round through the room today. PTO is doing an amazing job. Francis is here representing our teachers. Miss Carol representing our classified staff. We have 2 board members here, Mr. Wonka and Mr. Zdinich, who also helps us with our safety plan. And we're very fortunate to have Mr. Legge, who represents School Site Council. So as I mentioned before, our people show up and they do good things, and I appreciate what you do. So thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you.